Okay, we're at 1:15, so we're going to start our next session. Thanks everybody who's joining here, and thanks for sticking with us so far today. We are now in the home stretch with 3 more sessions to go. I've been caffeinating to make my way through the rest of the day. And I'm really happy today to have Adriaan Bloem joining us, who is someone I've known for a long time. I'm trying to remember when Adriaan and I met, but it's been a while, and we're longtime colleagues. And when people ask me sometimes what I miss since I've become an independent consultant about 4 years ago, I often say I miss being a part of a team and working with people who are smarter than me on a day-to-day basis. And Adriaan was definitely one of those people. He's a wonderful analyst, a wonderful digital expert in all sorts of sort of subdomains of digital. And several years ago, he moved down to Dubai to launch a very large streaming service, which many of you probably haven't heard of. But it's basically the Netflix of the Middle East, and except it has a lot more users than Netflix does. So it's huge and it's massive. And this is something that he's worked with a large team to build over the last couple of years. So we're going to quickly watch a video that Adriaan will tell us about, and then he'll introduce himself, and then we're going to have a very interesting discussion about this awesome project that he has worked on over the last couple of years. And we have some buffering.
أهلا فيكم بحفل إطلاق شاهد الجديد كليا.
That very tall building, which of course is the thing that we all recognize more than anything else in Dubai. So I will just stop sharing so you can see the two of us. So live from Dubai, Adriaan, that looked like a really fun party. Were you there?
Yes, I was definitely there, and very pre-COVID as well. Nobody wearing face masks, everybody happily standing together, and that was January 15th. So
this year.
Right before, yes, this year, okay. Right before everything changed. And that was actually, so the service has been around for around 12 years now, but this was our big relaunch event with all of the Arabic stars for our originals, and using Burj Khalifa, tallest building in the world, as a billboard for it. All of the chefs attending as well, and plenty of drinks afterwards. And that relaunch, of course, in hindsight, was at exactly the right moment for a large video streaming service.
That's for sure. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background, and how you ended up in Dubai. How does a Dutch guy end up in Dubai?
Well, you would know because you originally sent me here, so.
Yes, but you have to tell the story. I can't tell the story for you.
No, so it was, of course, this was one of the many companies that we worked with as colleagues, as analysts and consultants, and advising these companies on very large-scale digital projects. So I did a bunch of very different projects. I remember being at IKEA with you, talking about the search on images there. Working with Library of Congress, and NBC was one of those customers as well. And it was exactly at the moment where I was sort of feeling too detached from the projects that I was working on, because as a consultant, very often you get to sort of fly in, tell people this is what you should be doing and this is why, and then you come back 6 months later and you hope that it's stuck. And basically, it's like if half of it sticks, then it's already progress. But I just wanted to get back a bit and get my feet in the clay, as they say in the Netherlands, and do the hard work of actually pushing this through an organization. Because it's all great and well to know what to do, but I think everybody here would know that actually doing it takes a lot of convincing people, working with people, going across all these obstacles of getting budgets for it, convincing your CEO that this is really the way to go, and so on. And then actually executing on it, which is of course even harder. The reason to do this in Dubai is because at the time, I think a lot of digital projects in Europe and US were at a maturity level where you're talking about the whole raison d'etre of a project being 0.7% optimization of conversion. And that would be the budget for a big project. But that felt very marginal compared to the Middle East, which at the time had an internet penetration of about, I think, 35% on average of the people were online at the time. And this was, of course, right around, this was 2011, so right after the Arab Spring, where for the first time, it became very obvious that young people in the Middle East were, all of them were flocking online, and this new young generation was very different from the generations before who were watching TV and just sitting on the couch watching TV. And so a huge demographic of approximately 300 to 400 million Arab speakers, where it's largely skewed to a young audience, and most of them weren't online yet. So that kind of growth and having and being part of a service that addressed that, of course, was kind of an irresistible proposition.
Awesome. So you went down to Dubai, and initially you I guess you maybe explain for the audience the difference between MBC, so Middle East Broadcasting Corporation, and Shahid, the broadcast or the streaming service, and sort of how you ended up working on the streaming service and relaunching it.
Yeah, so MBC is a broadcasting company, and it changes all the time. But currently, I think 16 channels that are across the region, but also globally. I usually joke that you will buy a new TV, set it to automatically program all of the channels, and then you go through the channels to reorder them and delete the ones that you don't like. MBC is probably the one that is the first one that you would delete if you're in Europe, because you probably have it on your cable. But if you don't speak Arabic, of course, it's not going to be particularly convincing to keep it there. So as a television company, there's an audience of about 200 million people with things like our Arab's Got Talent and Arab's Idol. All of the famous shows and formats are basically Super Bowl type of events on TV. So very early on, like any traditional media company, there was a realization that things were going to usually change for TV. And as with print media and music industry before, everybody knows it's going to change, but that doesn't necessarily mean you know how it's going to change. And that's the big question out there is, okay, so what do we do to actually grab that audience on digital as well? So Shahid was started off as a corporation with a telco, basically doing small clips of the shows and so on, and then grew from that into, of course, back in the day, 2009, 2010, there was a website. And then 2012, we had the first apps actually for the service. And in the beginning, I think it was very much a catch-up service, sort of like more of a BBC iPlayer than a Netflix. We still have advertising, so AVOD free as well as subscription-based. So that's sort of the old Hulu model more than anything. And if you ask people in the Middle East, and we do this research, of course, on a regular basis, like what's a competitor of Shahid out there? Most people actually say YouTube. And then the second answer would be Netflix. But our name recognition in the region is slightly less than YouTube, but larger than Netflix. So more people know about Shahid than about Netflix around here. So that, of course, especially this year, behaviors changed. Ad revenues were falling, but we had this huge potential on a subscription service, which is much more resilient to that kind of change in behavior. So we shifted a lot of popular content from the free ad-supported part into the subscription part. So after that launch that you showed a clip of, the big launch, of course, 2 months later, everybody was going into lockdowns and stuck at home with nothing to do. And we had just relaunched this service with a bunch of Arabic originals, but also content from Disney and various other Western publishers. So people would watch the cool new Arabic comedy series, as well as Guardians of the Galaxy. So we literally went from 50,000 paying subscribers last year to 1.5 million, pretty much in 3 months.
Yeah, I would imagine that happened very fast, like to your point, when everybody was home all of a sudden.
Yes.
So from a, of course, this conference is about digital asset management. So the question, of course, that many people would ask is, okay, you build a streaming service, where's all this media sitting? Like what's the infrastructure behind it? Where are all these pieces of media being streamed from? So there's probably different layers that would make sense for you to tell us about.
It's actually, this is where I find it's incredibly useful to have a common understanding of acronyms, like what is DAM? And this is something that means completely different things to different parts of the company. So if I ask the broadcast technology guys, what is your asset management, they will look at DALET, which is our broadcast MAM, which is where all of the episodes and all of the versions of television episodes are in 50 megabit broadcast quality. That's where the compliance editing is done and so on. But of course, we take it from there, encode still right now on hardware encoders in the building, because it's a on-premise install, which is kind of outdated, and we need to move that in the next few years. We basically take it from there, and this is where it starts getting very important to know the functional areas, because we have what we call a CMS, which is not a web CMS. It's basically also an asset management system. This is where we add the metadata that actually shows on different episodes, seasons, the posters of the movies, and so on. We also have additional systems which would also qualify as asset management in their own right, for manipulating images and storing those posters and thumbnails and so on. And we're now thinking of adding another system, but people keep referring to all of these as MAM, DAM, CMS, which confuses everybody at the same time. So I spend a lot of time going around with different people and actually talking through, what does this mean to you? What are the functional areas that this system are supposed to cover? And where does it therefore sit in the bigger picture of this whole architecture? But so if you're asking where is it stored,
yeah.
The broadcast quality files sit on a very large file server in a building in Dubai, which in 2020 no longer makes any sense because cloud storage is way cheaper. But I'm working on that with TechOps to see if that can be changed. But for Shahid, everything is on Azure and on AWS, and that serves as the origin for the CDNs, which we use as opposed to satellite on the broadcast side. We use the CDNs to, of course, get this to the end users.
So there was a really interesting interview with you and one or two of your colleagues in, was it Broadcast Pro magazine, if I remember correctly,
yep.
Where you talked about the fact that you basically built some custom CDNs for this whole thing. And I thought there was a very amusing comment about how you had some subscribers in Greenland.
Greenland, yes.
weren't actually necessarily accommodating the very remote users, but so why a custom CDN? What drove that, and what has it done for the service?
So coming here, I had to dig back into my historic knowledge of from the 90s on how the internet works again. Because if you're in Europe or in the US, this is basically a solved problem. And I keep repeating this, like if you want to stream video or serve images in the US or in Europe, you go talk to Akamai, Limelight, Fastly, MaxCDN, Verizon, etc. you get pricing options and you pick basically the cheapest one. In emerging markets, so in South America, in the Middle East, in Africa even more so, that's only the second concern, because the first concern is like, where are your actual nodes for a CDN? Because the whole idea, of course, is you serve the streaming video to an end user from a location as close as possible, because that avoids buffering and going down to lower bit rates, all of the things that people hate in streaming video, all of the things that make them walk away from it and stop playing. So my main question always was, where do you have your servers? And do you have something in Riyadh? Do you have something in Cairo? Do you have, and they would all answer, well, we have one in the Middle East and it's in Dubai. Because my theory is Dubai is nice and accessible for Western people. You can have a nice holiday and install your CDN node and everybody's happy. You can now put us on the map. And that's largely what's happened. But the UAE market to us is almost irrelevant. It's around 800,000 users to us. What we are interested in is Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, etc. And they're just not there. So this is where, first of all, that's where our multi-CDN strategy came from. So we need multiple CDNs to cover this, because I'm patching the gaps in the map. But then you also realize that you can't just serve from neighboring countries. Like in Northern Europe, especially, you have the London Internet Exchange, you have the Amsterdam one, the Frankfurt one. These are some of the largest exchanges in the world. Everybody who is within a radius of 500 kilometers of these has perfect access to all kinds of content. Here, there's no such thing. The telcos don't really trust each other. They connect to each other in Frankfurt, even though that's 5,000 kilometers away. So you could be hosting from one server in Dubai, and you get a user from another who's on another telco, and that traffic effectively is 50 meters apart, but travels through Frankfurt. So we basically figured, okay, the only way to truly fix this, as well as put pressure on the CDNs to have better coverage, is start putting in our own nodes, which is something that Netflix has done for a while. Of course, our budgets and resources are way less than Netflix. So back in the day when Netflix started doing this, I talked to the guys who were working on this project, which was really interesting, and it was like 5 guys at the time. Then they built this out into Open Connect, which became this huge thing. And in the meantime, I was still debating this with our CTO and our CEO. Said, this is why you want to do this. Unfortunately, I now have to explain to you how networking actually works, and how the cables are running through the Mediterranean and around the Arabian Peninsula. Yes, I know nobody really cares about that until it becomes a problem. So that's been quite an experience in going back to brass tacks and just actually figuring out how to stream video yourself, as opposed to just contracting it out, which is less convenient, but much more interesting than just paying a company to do it for you.
Well, that's, if there's not a solution out there, you have to do it yourself, right? And I thought that was fascinating. And if for those of you who are more interested in this topic or want to learn a lot more about it, I recommend the interview in Broadcast Pro, where there's a lot more on that. We got a question from the audience, so I want to make sure that that we address those as they come in. And for those of you who want to ask a question, don't forget you can do so on the Q&A tab in the interface. So someone wanted to know, did you have any problems during the huge spike in demand when all of a sudden COVID hit and you got all these new users subscribing? Did you have any issues of scale when you had this big subscriber leap? And if you did, what did you do to resolve them?
I think this was counterintuitive to most people, except the people who run very large online services. The capacity of the internet is not the actual problem. So the bandwidth, even though there's issues and lots of distances and connection issues, the actual bandwidth and throughput is not really an issue. So the whole thing about Netflix reducing their resolutions in Europe in order to help the telcos to still deliver this, I take that with several grains of salt. In this region, especially in Ramadan, which is, I can simplify it as in media terms, as in it's 1 month of Thanksgiving and Christmas combined, where everybody is fasting during the day and then watching TV with the family and going online in the evening and at night. So we're used to seeing 10x spikes for 1 month a year. So all of the infrastructure in the region is built for that 10x spike during Ramadan. Pre-COVID to the first month was sort of unexpected because Ramadan was not, of course, in March or April. So we were already experiencing 5x traffic, which is much more than usual, but still less than our absolute peak that we see every year. Where the actual bottlenecks arise is with things where you would hope that you don't have to care about scaling, like your cloud providers. So there's these are the moments where suddenly you do care that Amazon in Singapore is actually a very small region. Amazon in Bahrain as well. Amazon Frankfurt, no real problems. Amazon Ireland, great. Virginia, no issues. And similarly, we actually started running into capacity problems with Microsoft on and off, because of course everybody was on Teams. So Microsoft was, apart from hosting everybody else, they had their own huge loads. So that was actually the main bottleneck, and we decided to split it up more across different regions for cloud providers because of it.
Okay, interesting. It's especially interesting to hear that you kind of already had planned for that because of what many would call the holiday rush in other regions. So so you were in some ways prepared for something that you didn't know was going to happen because it was the same sort of situation that you've been through before.
I think the Western equivalent would be if you're preparing for Christmas and it starts in September.
There you go. It happens sometimes. Let's talk a bit about the team that did this. So you're the head of digital infrastructure, and so obviously you're making a lot of infrastructure decisions. But what kinds of what was the size of the team that put this relaunch together and that made this a success? And tell us a bit about the roles and kind of how that fit into the larger MBC organization.
So, like I mentioned before, it started out a little bit as a side gig, as in we have to be prepared for the future. So for a very long time, it was actually quite successful already, but the entire tech team was around 10 to 15 people, and that's charitably, I'm including myself into the tech team there. Last year, we had an ex-VP from Hulu who came in to build out Shahid as an actual thing. So he started that January last year to build up to this relaunch, and that was for the first time that with full ambition to turn this into an actual very large concern for the company and a lot of investment. So we've been hiring like crazy in the past 2 years. And for instance, I'm currently looking for a team of 4 people to work on media technologies in Dubai. So if you know anybody who has a lot of familiarity with Amazon technologies and media, then please do ping me. We're now at about 106 people in our Jordan office, which is technology and product. There's in total, I think I'm losing count, but I think around 200 people now. So it's also big investments in marketing, customer care, in the actual business planning of it, and so on. So the origins are this tiny team of maybe 20 people who kept this going for about 10 years. And suddenly from that, we had to expand it into a 200 people team. But I think the result has been evident. And yes, we've been helped a little bit by the trends this year. I'm one of the few people who's not really complaining about 2020 because we're doing quite well. So I'm not allowed to complain. But that really has made a huge difference, actually properly resourcing everything. So on the technology side, I would estimate it's about 75 people right now. We are doing all of the apps in-house. We're doing a lot of the backend systems in-house as well. And we have an outsourced team of flexible between 20 and 60 people in Vietnam as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so was there ever a phase where you had to justify this project, to make a business case for this project? Or was it just sort of, let's update this, we need to invest in it, and it was kind of handed down that way?
It's much easier to pitch a business case, any ROI, to somebody who actually understands why this matters than to people who are still struggling to wrap their head around things. And I remember that 4 years ago, I was struggling to get funds for quality of service analytics. So how is your stream actually doing? How much is buffering? How much? What are the bit rates being played, etc. Which until then had basically been based on, well, my uncle in Riyadh says that Shahid is actually quite good, which to me is not very much. That's not a measurable KPI that you use to justify millions of spend on CDNs.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think most of the people attending this conference, they're, especially with large projects, they're constantly wondering, how do I get a business justification for this? And so I think in your case, it's a little more obvious.
I'm responsible for putting together the tech budget every year, and I do challenge other people, but also myself, to actually come up with sensible rationales. And in many cases, people don't really know where to start, because how do you put a value on this? But even if it's just something that you can, it's never going to be super scientific, but you can justify things by polling users on their satisfaction before and after. In our case, I want to look at the effect of buffering on number of minutes watched, because from there I can figure out what the ad inventory is that we have on Google Ad Server that we can actually sell. And we may not sell, but that I can put a value on that increase on ad inventory if I decrease buffering by a certain measure, which means that I know how much I should be investing in improving that. That is super helpful. It gets much harder if you're looking at an actual system to help you out, because then you're getting into all sorts of intangibles, and you can't really work out how much time you're saving on people doing their job, and what the actual efficiencies are in many cases. So that's a bit trickier, but yes, I do, even though we're doing well, I do still have to very much justify all of the spend. That's
good. That's good. I think everybody has to do that at some point. And even if you're not being asked to do it, you probably need to be ready to do it in case you get asked, right?
Yep.
So we only have a few minutes left. Wanted to ask if just your advice. I think that in terms of people, obviously launching a huge global streaming service is not something that most people will do in their careers. But if you were to, if you were to offer advice, even for some organization that wants to do a smaller scale streaming service, where they want to broadcast, regular short shows or something, what kind of advice would you give people who are trying to embark on let's say a smaller scale of what you're trying to do?
I think the crucial part that I had to get into very quickly when I joined here as well is it's very easy to think that video is just a very large binary asset, and then you put it on a web server and people can watch it. But it's very important to know the basics of streaming video and how this actually works, because it's not exactly rocket science. It has been around for a while, but it's crucial that you understand why there's multiple versions of the video, why those are in different bit rates, and how players actually then use this to, based on your internet connection, switch between the different qualities, how it's segmented. I think you could probably pick this up in an hour and a half if you Google and read a couple of white papers and so on. But if you don't, then you're still stuck in the mistaken belief that it's just a very large file, and you put this very large file in your WordPress upload folder and you're done. That's not going to be very satisfactory.
Yeah. Okay. Good one. Good one. I think that's it. I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions. No, that's it. I've been through ours, but we have 1 minute left. So do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yeah, no, it's funny because we always get compared to Netflix and to YouTube, etc.
Yeah.
And so basically, we're actually the Hulu of the Middle East, more than the Netflix of the Middle East, and we're much larger than Netflix. But also, it's a very different type of service. So I find it interesting right now that there's a lot of companies who've tried to launch their own VOD services on very niche kind of topics, where I would say our main USP is Arabic content, but that's hardly a niche. That's a very large potential audience. But it's interesting to figure out where to actually position a product like this, as well as actually making it work. So I'm enjoying myself trying to figure out a zillion things, and I'm also enjoying the fact that we have a large enough team to make it work, but it's small enough that I have to wear about 20 different hats and be across many different topics, which keeps me on my toes. So yeah.
Cool. That's good career advice. I think we all need to be in that situation every once in a while. Some days I wish I didn't have 12 or 13 clients at once. But other days, but then I realized it's much more interesting that way, right? When you have to put off those hats. Yeah, it makes it more interesting. All right. Well, thank you, everyone who's attending the session. Thank you, Adriaan, for joining us and for offering your advice and insights. And hopefully we'll see you again at one of these damn conferences, maybe in the flesh sometime. Right.
Hopefully, maybe end of next year, everything will be back to semblance of normality.
Or sooner, let's hope. I'm trying to be optimistic. All right. Thank you, everyone.